It might be helpful if we took a walk through the notes from this week to kind of sort out a few of the things that you really need to know about your learning this week. When you're an independent learner, you need to be able to ask questions and you need to be able to find the answers independently. I would suggest your textbook is a good source. Those of you who are at home have that. So the learning target here is to explain the structure of living things at the atomic molecular level. So we're going to start from the very ground up with living things and build until we get to the whole biosphere from your hierarchy. So a big idea here is the chemicals of life. What are they made out of? They're actually biomolecules, which are macromolecules made from smaller, simple, repeating units in precise arrangements. Those small, simple units are called monomers, and the macromolecules are often called polymers, poly meaning many. So the main monomers that we want to look at are amino acids, right here. Those make up proteins. Nucleic acids, which make up DNA. Sugars and starches, which are carbohydrates. And then lipids, which are fats. We're also going to take a look at ATP because that's what your body uses to pull the energy out of glucose and transfer it around so that you can use it to do things like write down these notes. Carbon compounds. They're all carbon compounds. They contain a lot of carbon, which, as you've probably heard before, is the basis of life. Carbon bonds with other carbon to form chains or rings, either one, so you'll see both of those things. Carbon is unique because it can bond with 1, 2, 3, or 4 other atoms. Often those other atoms are another carbon. They're hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, or sulfur. Those are the common parts. Because carbon with 4 valence electrons has 4 chances to form bonds. Oxygen, for example, only has 2. Hydrogen has 1. So they wouldn't be as good as a basis for life. And if you look at the hierarchy of living things, you might want to get yours out and make a few notes. You can stop and do that. Where we are, biosphere at the top is every living thing on Earth, every living thing to the bottom of the sea, to the top of the atmosphere. Okay, we're going to start at the bottom here. Electrons and protons and neutrons make up the atom. Okay, the protons and neutrons are in the nucleus. The electrons float around somewhere outside the atom. In water, the electrons are what is shared in the covalent bond, and the electrons cause the polarity in hydrogen bonding. Atoms, and here's your example of that if you remember from your water notes. The electrons, where there are a lot of electrons, we have negative charges. Where the electron from hydrogen has been pulled towards oxygen, we have positive charges. So we have polarity. The atoms, hydrogen and oxygen here, will bond together to make a molecule, that's water, and the other atoms involved here, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen in particular, and phosphorus in only one case, okay. Phosphorus is found in ATP, okay, that's the P part. All of those things make up proteins and enzymes. These are made of amino acids. Okay. DNA is made from nucleic acids. Sugars and starch are carbohydrates. Fat from a lipid. And ATP is a molecule in itself. Functional groups are what you use to identify these different kinds of biomolecules. I would expect that by now these things are all in your notes, so if you want to take a minute to get them out to review, please do. If they're not, they should be, and you need to do that. The large organic molecules that you need to be learning, which you will identify using functional groups. Here are the functional groups. Here are the names of the functional groups, and you'll find the structures down below. You need to be able to identify these. That's your goal after looking at these notes and spending some time with your own. Organic molecules are what you're going to be identifying with them. So you're going to be looking for these functional groups in combination with more carbon and often some of these elements as well. Here are the 5 biomolecules. Here they are. When you're asked to list them, here they are. I'm always giving you the functional groups and the molecules in the order in which you'll try to identify them. Okay? You'll first look for a phosphate, then a CN ring, then an amino group, then a carboxyl group, and then a hydroxyl group. So we'll look here at what those things are. A phosphate group, if you look at a molecule and you first look for this, you look for a P surrounded by 4 O's. That's the phosphate group, functional group. These are the functional groups. And the molecule is ATP. So if you're looking for an ATP, you're going to look for a phosphate group. If you're trying to identify what a molecule is, the first thing you'll do is say, well, does it have a phosphate group? If it does, it's an ATP. If it doesn't, you'll move on to the next step, 2. In 2, you see carbons here. Carbons are sometimes not shown, they're assumed or inferred, as in this drawing right here of the same thing, where there is no element specified. It's going to be a carbon, okay? So you'll look first for a ring that is made of carbons and nitrogens, nothing else. There could be 1 ring or there could be 2 rings. There could be another one beside it. If you see this, you have a nucleic acid, which makes up DNA. Okay? If you don't have a phosphate group and you don't have a carbon-nitrogen ring, you're going to look for a nitrogen attached to 2 or 3 hydrogens. You might see them, and this is just a bond, you might see them written as NH3, NH2+. You might also see an H3N depending upon the orientation of that particular group on the molecule. And the molecule that those make up, this is an amine group, and the molecules that they make up are called amino acids, which make up protein. Okay, so functional group. Okay, this is functional group right here, functional group, and then the molecule is here. Now, if you don't have a phosphate and you don't have any nitrogen, you're going to look for something different. You're going to look for a carboxyl group, which has a C. Now here there must be a double bonded O on the C, two lines, 4 electrons, 2 pairs of electrons. You can see it written this way, or you might see just COOH. It's called a carboxyl group, and it identifies the molecule lipid. Okay. Now, if you don't have a double bonded O, if you don't have this, if you just have a carbon chain or a ring with a whole bunch of OHs on it, a whole bunch could be 2 or 3 even, with you have OHs on it, then you have a hydroxyl group. And that is what you use to identify a carbohydrate, like a starch or a sugar. So again, you're going to look for the functional groups in this order. The first thing you do when you look at a molecule is you should go through this process in your head. Is there a phosphate group? Yes, then it's an ATP. No? Then let me look for a carbon-nitrogen ring. If there is a carbon-nitrogen ring, bingo, we have a nucleic acid. If not, you're going to say, well, is there any nitrogen at all, and is it an NH3? If yes, you have an amine group here, and the molecule would be an amino acid. Let's see, we have no phosphate, no nitrogen, and no carbon-nitrogen ring. The next thing we're going to look for is double bonded O's to a carbon, or a COOH written down. If you have this, you have a carboxyl group, and that molecule is a lipid. If you don't have any double bonded O's, but you just have a whole string of carbons with some OHs on it, then you have a hydroxyl group and a carbohydrate. So this is the order you'll look for them in. And here are the corresponding molecules. Phosphate group would be for ATP. The carbon-nitrogen ring will give you a nucleic acid. Nitrogen, not on a carbon-nitrogen ring, but just free nitrogen, will give you an amino acid. Lipid will be determined by finding a COOH, or carboxyl group. And carbohydrates are when you see a bunch of OHs, but no double-bonded O's. This is a carbohydrate found by a hydroxyl group. Okay? If you look for them in this order, you won't be confused by the fact that sometimes the amine groups might have a carbon-nitrogen ring, but that's not what you're looking for. Also, the nucleic acids sometimes have an amine group on them, but you're looking for this first. You're looking for this first. Okay. Organic molecules. This is a review of the basic chemistry of a carbon atom. And I would expect you to read through that and see that here's your carbon atom with 4 electrons, meaning you can have 4 bonds. And here are 4 hydrogen atoms all ready to pair up with the unpaired electrons on the carbon atom. This happens to be methane, or natural gas. If you have a big tank in your backyard, you have propane. It's not natural gas. If you lived in a bigger city, you might have natural gas available to you from the city. That would be methane. Methane is also what cows burp. Okay? You can have a couple different kinds of bonds. Here's an example of a single, a double, and a triple bond. 1 pair of electrons shared in 1 line, 2 pairs of electrons shared in the double bond, 2 lines, and 3 pairs of electrons in the triple bond. Here's an example of how those work. You would never see another element doing this, and you would never see carbon with more than 4 bonds. Even this carbon has 4 bonds. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4 bonds. So you couldn't put any more H's on either of those. Now, in the biomolecule chart, the first thing you're going to do is just this column, okay? And down here, you're going to draw or find an image of and paste an ATP. Here, you'll find a nucleic acid. Here, an amino acid. Here, a lipid. And there, a carbohydrate. Once you get the molecule pasted in, you're going to highlight or circle the functional group. That would be the phosphate for the ATP. It would be a carbon-nitrogen ring for the nucleic acid, an NH3, one of those guys, for amino acid, for lipid, a COOH, or just an OH for carbohydrate. That's the only column you're going to fill in right now. But that will give you a good idea of what you're going to be looking for. This inquiry is meant to be a group inquiry. It's way better done with discussion and talking about things with your friends, but you're not here. So if you want to FaceTime somebody, you can, or you can work through this by yourself. The models are all you need to answer the questions. You shouldn't be looking at this and skimming over it and then trying to Google this answer. It's not going to be helpful. Look at the model. Everything in the model is what you need to answer. Don't forget the reading part. This will tell you what the point is and give some explanation to the model that you're looking at. And then you should be able to answer the questions. The keys are some pretty big, important information. And this is what you have in your notes already from before also. So you should be able to pick those groups out of these 4 molecules. Okay? And the molecule that you don't have here is ATP, because it's one thing, and once you learn to identify it, you're good. Okay. Oh, you do have an ATP. You don't have any. That's really odd. Okay, so you have a phosphate. The next model is going to teach you about some reactions, and you can let that go until you're done with everything else here. Other bit you have, I don't have a copy of it here, but it's a chart, and that chart that you're going to be filling in, what's the review study guide, is going to just be a review of all the pieces that you have already seen here. So have a look at those, and then if you still have questions, give me an email and we can arrange a Zoom. So also use your textbook. Just look for the chapter on biomolecules and you'll find some really good information in there. That's why I sent that home with you, because it's a good supplement to what you're seeing here. It's not the only thing that you'll need to do these, but it's really going to be helpful for you. So again, as an independent learner, you're going to kind of miss out on some of the group discussion part that we could have here, and you're welcome to come back anytime. Let me know about your questions, and have a good day.